We're going to be here talking about our books and talking about the power of storytelling, the power of storytelling in Black historical fiction, the power of storytelling in communities and our lives. The discussion will go kind of where it goes, but I know personally, I'm really looking forward to hearing both of you and talking with both of you about your wonderful, beautiful books, the vivid description, the way that you bring these stories to life, the way that you touch our souls and give us just what we need at just the right time. So I am so excited for this. And what I'm hoping to do is to be able to give subliminal messages that like say, read your book, read your book. Because, between you and I love being read to. It's like a special treat. And on a cold winter London night like tonight, nothing will warm my soul more than hearing you both read. See how subtle I am. If you are joining us and you have not yet read the books, you have plenty of time to run out and purchase one of the books from one of our Black owned and Black led bookshops. And we will show you the list at the end. And there'll be no spoilers, although I can't keep a secret for anything, but ideally there'll be no spoilers. It'll be a discussion that you can join in. You can pop your questions in the Q&A if you have some. And if you wouldn't mind, in the chat, can you just pop your city or town or wherever you're joining us from, if you can pop it in the chat. And shall we get started?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I guess since I feel like I have a microphone, can I start off with, I loved both of your books. I loved the characters and the journey that you took us on, the emotions. Every once in a while I pick up a book and I need to feel something and I don't even know what I need to feel, but I felt like you gave that to us. But I'm always curious what it cost the writer to write these books, to take us on these emotional journeys. Can you talk a little bit about the emotional journey that your books took you on? We'll start with Shelly and then go with Edward, if that's okay.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't what I expected. At times we go into it with it feeling like work. At other times it's a passion project, but I didn't realize how people always ask you how much of your book comes from your own life, how much is autobiographical. Well, very little of mine is in the literal sense of these events did not happen to me. But other than that, as far as the emotional aspects of it, I think it's probably one of the most autobiographical works that I've produced. Just having emotional experiences and then recontextualizing them for my characters to go through. And so it was pretty emotionally taxing with that respect.
Thank you. What about you, Edward?
Yeah, for me, it first started off as like a journey through my parents' stories. So both of my parents worked the cotton fields, and that right there was the catalyst for me to dive into these characters' lives. And I thought it was going to be, just me having an external. So, okay, I have these stories, and how do I, as a writer, put them onto the page? However, the story deals with a young Black boy's search for identity, and that had to resonate. And once it started to resonate within me, my natural inclination is to push it out. But I realized that for the sake of the story, for the sake of really telling a true narrative, that I had to let it in and I had to internalize it and think about my own search for identity. And although, like M Shelly says, like my story is not me, the pale is not me. The search for identity is something that we all go through, no matter what our race, our background. And so that part truly resonated, and it became emotional, very emotional at times, when I was really trying to understand exactly how this character might feel. And then I had to think about circumstances in my own life. So it became very personal at that point.
Thank you.
And then to you, Yvonne.
Yes.
Yes.
So for me, it started out with a question, and I wanted to know how Black American, African American emancipated slaves, how they found one another after the emancipation. For me, when I look at what's a horror story, if I don't know that my kids are safe, and if they don't know that I love them, like every day I tell my kids I love them, because you just never know what's going to happen from day to day. And I always want them to remember that no matter what happens in life, somebody loved me with their whole body and soul. And so for me, it was really important for my characters to have that, but also because I had that question of how do you find someone who maybe it's been 10, 20, 30, 40 years, a lifetime, and you don't recognize them by face. Their name has changed. You don't know where in the world they might be. And the world can feel like a really big place. And I'm imagining it felt like a really hostile place. And so how do you navigate that? I was really hoping for happy endings, like to read a lot about, people reconnecting and finding each other. What I ended up reading or writing about was people finding new ways to find love and new ways to look at family and new ways to, I guess, position themselves, both in the community and with themselves. And so while I was writing it, I wasn't writing my story or my family's story, but I found that I was writing my search for stories, because for me, that's how I connect with people. Like I forget names, I forget faces, but for some reason I remember stories, because it's like that little connection. And also because it feels like a gift, like someone is giving me this thing, and I treasure it and it's precious and I remember it. And I think for me, that's like the biggest honor I can do for that story is to remember it. So those things connect me. So writing Remember took me on emotional journeys that I hadn't been expecting. And I guess part of it was the pursuit of love for them, for these characters, and knowing like that heartbreak for them, and knowing that their version of love might be unfulfilled. But it also took me, I guess, emotionally through looking at relationships of mothers and daughters, and that search for a place to call home, and what that is, and what that, how that changes. So while it wasn't at all autobiographical, I felt like it gave me more than it cost me. But there were nights that the research or the characters, where they were going, their story, where it was painful to write, because it just, it touches you. And I would be sitting there and crying. And I still remember when I knew that Tempe was going to die, it was because I had this image of her, and she was in a doorway, and there was flames all around her, and I knew she wasn't going to survive the story. And I was crying. I was heartbroken, but there was like nothing I felt like I could do. And then my daughter was like, "What's the matter?" And I was like, Tempe's dying. And she was like, "Aren't you the one killing her?" And I'm like, "No, I am not a murderer. What are you talking about?" But so it was an emotional place that I didn't expect to go, like with writing. But I do feel like it ultimately gave me more than it took. So thank you for asking. Can we talk about? So I'm always interested in place, and the ways that writers navigate like place, and how clearly or not clearly you can see the setting of your stories. Can you talk about the world that you've created? Because you've brought us into these, places, and we can see it through your eyes, through your character's eyes. But how clearly or vividly do you see it?
Can I take that one first, Edward?
Yes, I can take that one first. It's so funny because I can vividly see Chicago because of Everyman. And it's funny, I've never been to Chicago, but I want to take that tour that the I believe it's the uncle takes him on her on a tour of like Chicago, the precious monuments that Black history in Chicago. I thought that was fascinating. But for Pale, for me, the idea of place is where the story started. So I always say I grew up seeing the cotton fields, hearing my parents' stories. And so Greenwood, Mississippi, where the story takes place, that's where my father's family is from. And so growing up, we would be in Greenwood, Mississippi all the time, and it's like a 2-hour drive from Memphis. And so We would take that 2-hour drive and there's nothing but cotton around you. There's some cornfields, but it's mostly cotton. And so for 2 hours, you're just watching cotton go by. And as a kid, I did not appreciate it. It was boring. And I wanted nothing more than to get to arrive at our destination and have some fun. However, as an adult, those moments resonate with you and they stick with you. And so although I live in Los Angeles now, I can't help but to go back to those days. And I go back to them as a source of peace. And so when I was writing a story that dealt with so much violence or violent tension, let me put it that way, violent tension, and they're surrounded by cotton, and the cotton is now a part of this violent tension. It was this interesting juxtaposition because I now had a love for the cotton, and it gave me peace when I would reflect on it. But I was writing a story where the cotton was something that was used to manipulate folks, keep people down, keep them in a certain social class position. And so the idea of place really resonated for me as I was writing this story, and I wanted to convey that to the reader, the sense of hope that comes with the cotton, because there is a prosperity with it, but with that prosperity, there's the flip side of the people who work to give that prosperity to others. So yeah, place was definitely a big part of Pale for me.
Yeah, same for Everyman. Chicago, where it starts, and then of course the narratives parallel the Great Migration in reverse, and moving south. And so I grew up in Chicago, specifically Chicago South Side, and I have an incredible love for the city and the South Side of the city. But we also experience a lot of disparities in the way the South Side has been rendered and regarded, even now, through narratives of gun violence. And so much has been written about A Tale of Two Cities, how the predominantly Black South Side of Chicago is treated, and how that is differed from the predominantly white North Side. Even recently, I just saw this viral video that a comedian put out about looking at the snowplow trackers and seeing where you could track in somewhat real time of where the snow was being plowed. And there's this black hole on the South Side where no snowplows have been dispatched, right? And so it's just this disparity in services and things like that. But the South Side is vibrant and it's beautiful. And I think about the roots of it, of these families, many that arrived there during the Great Migration, traveling from the South to Midwestern cities for industry and greater opportunities. And so I really wanted to paint a picture of that vibrancy of the South Side and its strong connection to the South, because during the course of this book, where the most contemporary period is 1972 Chicago, which is about the end of the Great Migration, this is how you get a lot of those characters there. And so the strong connections that they have to the South, like my family has had, both of my parents are from the South. My mom's from Memphis, Edward, and my dad was from Arkansas. And I currently live in Arkansas, and I guess this reverse Great Migration. But the other locations in Everyman that are important are Ideal, Georgia, which is the city that I selected. I wanted someplace small. I chose Macon County because when I attended Tuskegee University, I just thought it was interesting that a place could be so small that they wouldn't say the city that they're from. They would just be like, I'm from Macon County, Georgia. And I'm like, the county? Well, what's the city? And so that always stuck with me. And I wondered what that place would be like. And it's a beautiful little tiny city that I did get a chance to visit as I was writing. And the other location, of course, is Tuskegee University, where I attended. And just the amount of history in a space like that, and how it's connected, and so many people, not just Southerners, but when I was at Tuskegee, one of the largest alumni organizations was the Chicago alumni. So you've got huge amounts of people from Chicago and California going down and still attending HBCUs like Tuskegee University. And so I really wanted to get a strong sense of these three places and their connections. So yeah.
Thank you. And for me, it was, I always knew that Remembered was going to have connections to Philadelphia. And so part of that is because I was born in Philadelphia, but also my grandmother lived there for a long time. She had a house in Philadelphia. She had 4 houses and she had 4 kids. So it was like kind of her legacy was leaving property for her children. And one, I admire that. Like, she's my hero. And I wanted to use Philadelphia because I love that about her. So my characters lived on 20th Street because my grandmother lived on 20th Street. But that's kind of the only part of the Philadelphia that's true to it. I didn't use the real hospital in Germantown because at that time that hospital wouldn't have provided services to Black people. And what I didn't want to do was to say, like, dear reader, if you're from this community in Philadelphia, your grandmother might have been a racist. Like, do you know what it was? It wasn't like that sort of book. That wasn't what I was trying to do. So I made up a hospital in this community for that. But that was my main reason for Philadelphia, was because it was a place that was important to my grandmother. So of course, it's the place that's important to me. And then when my characters are enslaved, they're enslaved in Maryland. So when they're free, they're in Philadelphia. When they're enslaved, they're in Maryland. I lived in Maryland for 20 years before moving to the UK, and so I like it. It's been home. It's my children were born there, but I guess knowing it in a certain way gives you a chance to kind of play with it. There was no Sweetwater, or there might be a Sweetwater in Maryland, but the where they live on in Sweetwater and Walker's Plantation, it's I grew up, one of the places I grew up was Sweetwater, New Jersey. And it's a really rural town. Like, it had a creek. It had, I feel like one main street that was paved and the rest of them kind of like weren't, because, they didn't, I don't know. It had one store, and my first job there was picking blueberries. And then when I got, it wasn't a promotion because they always wanted to fire me. Like, they always would be like, if you don't pick enough, we're going to fire you. And I'd be like, it felt like a promise. And I'm like, please fire me. And they wouldn't fire me. And then the next year I came back and I was packing blueberries. And they're like, if you don't pack enough, we're going to fire you. So I always felt like I was going to get blueberries back. And so on the plantation, the only thing they can grow is, it's haunted. So they can only grow blueberries and carrots. So for me, I think place has been a way that I think also because I'm looking for home and where that is, I have a weird relationship to some physical places, but I can play with them in my imagination in certain ways that make them feel like, oh, these stories belong here, and this is a part for these characters, at least for me. And so I love that sense of, like, you all knowing this is exactly where it's going to be set, and this is why, and this is how. And I see that a question popped up. Let's see. Do you all want me to ask it, or do you want to ask it? Or do you want to?
Let's see, I can ask it.
Okay.
I have to get used to technology. Okay, perfect. So we have a question from Facebook. Peppermint would like to know, do you feel LGBTQIA plus experiences in Black historical fiction are given the needed spotlight? Very good question. Do you feel LGBTQIA plus experiences in Black historical fiction are given the needed spotlight?
Absolutely not. is the short answer. I think when we're looking at experiences that have been marginalized just even in literature and in fiction and in historical fiction. I mean, we're getting like narrow, more and more narrow, right? And so there's always been this belief that there's a hierarchy or prioritization of race over gender and sexuality, and just not this understanding of intersectionality, that it's not my race or my gender or my sexuality necessarily that are happening in order number 1, 2, or 3, but because of the intersections of all of these identities, that gives me a unique experience as a Black queer woman. And we just don't necessarily see that even reflected in our fiction. It's and not to even talk about fiction, a perfect example of that is Bayard Rustin, and how so much of his life as a Black gay man during the Civil Rights Movement just could not address the disparities and the inequalities that we face as LGBTQIA people. We have to deal with race, right? First, let's liberate ourselves as Black folks, and then we could deal with the other stuff. But it's the same justification that we see amongst marginalized communities, that whatever is the majority identity within that uses the same language and techniques and tactics to further marginalize the least of us in these circles. And so I think, we all could certainly do a better job at centering some of these most marginalized experiences, particularly with regard to Black trans women, when we think about movements like Black Lives Matter and other social movements as well.
I would also say no, but and you know what? One thing you just said about we can all do a better job, and I think that's what I would want to see, and I guess that's what I would ask too, is because it's not being done right now, and what can we do so that we are telling these stories and making these the characters complex and rich, and so that it's not just a stereotypical character, because I feel like I can't read one more book with one more stereotypical character who doesn't get to want anything, to have anything, to pursue anything, no obstacles, no challenges, but also no sense of depth on the page. And so what can we do in nonfiction, creative nonfiction, and historical fiction? What can we do?
Yeah. And I would just add that I think the stories exist. It's really about, I think I still have the fear that, will this story be accepted? Is there space on the shelf? Is there space within publishing where this story would be accepted? And because I believe that there are these narratives that are out there, and there just has to be an acceptance and room for them. And I feel that these stories are still fighting to have a spotlight. And so, I don't want to be pessimistic about it, but I do believe that there is a sense of, okay, you can be celebrated during this time. So we'll celebrate a few right here, but not throughout. It won't last 12 months. And so I think that's a narrative that even happens during Black History Month, is why 1 month? This is American history. It's 12 months of the year. And so I think we are, I know for myself, like definitely fighting to make sure that that is a 12-month narrative. And I am appreciative when I see other platforms pushing to make sure that all of our histories are a 12-month platform. And so I believe that these narratives, they need to have a voice. They need to have a spot on the shelf, a spot within publishers, taking a chance to say, to really truly believe that there is an audience out here and people are craving they're craving these narratives.
I also wanted to add that because it took, over a decade, closer to 15 years for me to write Everyman, I hadn't quite realized how queer it was as a book, because like I said, it's one of my most autobiographical work as far as the emotional journey. But as I was becoming more comfortable with my own queerness, so was the book, kind of becoming more queer. And I knew that one of my main characters, Nell, was going to be a lesbian, but the more that I continued to write and characters just started to kind of appear, and queer narratives started appearing, that was a direct result of the work that I was personally doing to be more comfortable with my queerness. And now sometimes I'll look at it, I'll read it, and I'll get these questions, and I'm just like, oh man, I really, really forgot how queer this book is. We've got non-binary character, we've got lesbian, we've got queer women, and these stories and narratives. And so one of the questions that I really was trying to address was, where are the queer folk during, these time periods, the Black queer folk? Because I know they were in the communities. We hear about it. We use the terminology, oh, so-and-so, is forever a bachelor, or a little funny, or a little sugar in their tank, or, that's a special friend, all of these terms. And specifically what kind of drove my dive into this is, a lot of times as a queer person, you'll get asked, oh, are you sure this isn't just a phase? And so I always thought, well, Black folks go from seemingly not knowing anything about this to, is it just a phase? And I'm like, wait a minute, are there these phases? Have y'all gone through these phases? Is that a thing that you don't bring out until, it pops up? Like, if this never came up, you would never say, is this just a phase? So I'm like, are there stories of Black folks who went through queer phases? Or more than likely, are there stories or narratives of Black folks who were queer and were phased out of it because of society and expectations? And now that's what remains. It is now called, it was a phase, but, pressured out of it for other reasons. And so I wanted to dig into those potential stories. What remains of it now, of that narrative, is that it was a phase. But what if it was so much more than that? And so when we get characters like Claudette and Janita in my story, that's, in the novel, that's what that's looking like.
I love the using your novel to answer questions and to explore questions, and even the ways that the novel can make you ask different questions. So like, you might start out saying, well, this is what I'm going to ask, and this is what it might do, or what I want to what I'm hoping to explore. And then you start writing it, and the novel's like, we're not going there, or we're going there and we're going here. Can you talk about, were there other things that you were either writing or thought you were going to write and didn't write, or that you ended up writing and had no idea that that's where the characters were going to take you, or the story was going to go? Shall I start? And then Ed was like, yeah. So I think for me, I knew there were certain questions around people, how you found each other. And I knew I wanted to kind of explore that. And I think other things that came out that I wasn't really expecting were the things around, like, as a mother, how far will you go to keep your child safe? And the characters showed me some things that I was not expecting about, like, what freedom might look like, or what love might look like, even what saving someone might look like, and the ways you might define that. So that, yes, there's a character who does some questionable things, and she kills the babies, so she kind of loves them to freedom, and she develops a system for this, and for her it's better than them being enslaved. And I wasn't expecting her to do this, and I'm always curious, because when people talk about having like a least favorite character, it's always her, and they blame her for these circumstances. But then nobody says, like, you know what? And that slaver, the person who enslaved her, the person who or somebody who would keep these rules and these laws in place, like they don't question that. So I think even now I'm more curious about like who accepts responsibility for some of these things that people had to do because of these circumstances. But I wasn't expecting to write as much about relationships with mothers and daughters, relationships with sisters. And also, I didn't set out, I knew I had complications about the role of religion in people. I want to say keeping people enslaved. It's not, I don't mean it in that way, but I do mean in that the keeping the mindset like that this is either what God wants for you, or you should endure this because this is going to happen later. So I would always have this complicated relationship with how religion was used as a weapon. And I wasn't expecting to write about it. I was expecting to leave that out of it, just, not now. And it's just like my characters were like, no, because I have this sort of relationship with it and I need to deal with it. And so I let them deal with it in the ways that they could. So what about you all? Were there surprises or things that you weren't expecting?
You got it, Edward?
Yeah. So I think for me, it was, so I've always been curious about this notion of sort of like a person who has a lot of promise over their life. They're expected to do great things, and they have the capacity to do so. But what if they're just a setup for someone else? What if that capacity is really to set someone else up, and all of this this potential is for this other person to reach the level of success, the heights? And so, as I was writing Pale, my favorite character, Fletcher, where I wanted no harm to come to him, and all the harms just seemed to come to him left and right. And I, Yvonne, we've spoken about this, where I'm rooting for him, you're rooting for him, and things just kept happening to him. And so, as I wrote, I was constantly evaluating, what's happening to him, what's happening on this journey. And so it became this sense of, will he make it to the promised land? Is this for him? And that question was not something I thought I would be exploring, because for me, if I was writing this to make everything happen the way I want it to happen, he would make it to that promised land, and all of the riches would be for him because he truly deserved them. And so as I wrote, I was very surprised by this new notion that like I said, I had always thought about outside of this novel. It made its way into this novel as to what happens when you are a person of great promise. And it turns out that promise may be to really guide and help someone else, and they reach the true heights that you expected to land on. So that was it for me.
Well, the biggest surprise for me was that that Everyman was going to be historical fiction. So it was originally intended to be more contemporary at the time, but the stakes just weren't big enough. I mean, we've got a character who is trying to figure out her family lineage, even just kind of mother, father, that sort of deal. And so, yeah, I mean, now it's like, and then she, logged on to Ancestry DNA, it's end of the story, right? But it was going to originally happen, I think maybe like in the 90s or something like that. And so it being so contemporary, the stakes just weren't high enough. And so I needed to find a time period, just kind of the right temperature where things were happening socially and politically that would just increase the stakes for this. The next, I guess, big surprise was, again, as I said, the book started to get more queer, right? So the relationship between Claudette and Janita, I had a character, Claudette, who was flirting with a married man. And it seemed just so one-dimensional that, oh, you know, she's the wanton hussy or whatever. Ooh, she's wearing red nail polish, right? And so I was like, I can't do that. You know, not the strong Black womanist that I am. Why would I do this to a woman? I didn't want to take those actions away. I still wanted her flirting with a married man. I just needed to figure out, why would she do it? And, you know, sex was just not enough of a motivator. Wanting to feel wanted and desired was just not it. I said, what if there's a deeper, you know, rationale with this? What if she wants people to see him flirting or see her flirting with him? She wants this. Why would she want such a thing? And then I thought, it's to distract them from seeing something else. She would rather be thought to be a whore than to be seen to be a Black queer woman who's in love with another woman. And so that was a very pleasant surprise. And then the other surprise, which just kind of, I guess is par for the course after you get through writing, you're writing and you're getting surprised by your own work. It gets this momentum where it feels like it's writing you. And so the salt incident in the Uses of Salt chapter, which, you know, it's one of my favorite chapters. I just really was kind of doubling down on using this object to represent so many different things. And what happens just to nail that, you know, this abuse that she experiences, I wanted it to be something extremely unique, not explicitly sexual abuse or the physical abuse that we usually see, but like, you know, she gets salt poured down her throat by her mom's boyfriend. And so even after I finished writing that, I'm like, what the hell? Wait, right? So yeah, but it also was at the point where I was like, this is what the rest of this book needs to do. And so that was like my lodestar chapter. It's what I used to revise all of the chapters that came before it. And it's what I used to create all of the chapters that came after it. I'm like, every chapter needs to do what this chapter has done. And surprise me in these ways, but also like, yo, but I'm gonna be ready for this, right?
I love the idea of your book writing you and like deciding the questions that you're going to explore and the places that you're going to take it. And then even coming up with either like, this is how this is going to go from this chapter on. I love that. There is a question from Facebook. What is the one lesson that you hope your novels teach non-people of color or cis readers?
That these are universal stories. Just like we say Black history is American history and world history, so are these stories. And that Black people and Black queer folk can be avatars for universal themes: love, loss, grief, adventure, that you can get these stories and relate to the stories if the characters don't look like you or share these particular experiences. And we seem to think that's true for white characters and cis-het characters, but we don't necessarily. All of a sudden we want to kind of draw a line with characters of color and queer characters of color. So.
Yes, I definitely agree with that universality. And I would say, for me, it's this sense of trying to understand someone who's different from you and giving grace to that. So I think everything in Pale is showing how characters or people in general can do some messed up things. And they do things based on the trauma that they've experienced. And so all of Pale is an examination into the trauma that we face that can then lead to our actions. And so no character is necessarily bad. And so the goal was to show characters who are clearly not bad. They have this range to them. And then we see by the things that have happened to them that they then, hurt people. And so they start to hurt people around them. And so I think that's the lesson to anyone who reads, no matter what lens they're coming to the novel from, is that our experiences help to shape us. And I say it all the time that I don't believe that we are born bad. I believe in the goodness of people, and I want to give that grace to everyone and extend it to everyone, no matter what their actions are. And I want to get to know them on a deeper level. So I hope that Pale continues that conversation and continues to push people to look beyond a person's behaviors and what our biases are, because we all have them and we all expect things. It's a self-preservation thing. I want to make sure I'm okay. So if I see you, I might behave a certain way because I want to make sure I'm okay and I'm safe. But as long as I'm checking those and I'm checking in with myself to make sure that I'm looking to see the good in people. And then Yvonne, to you.
Great answers. I think mine would be that, so for me, the greatest gift I get from reading and from stories is they help me to connect. They teach me about people. They help me to check in with myself to see my emotional landscape. And they remind me, like you said, that sometimes good people do bad things, that sometimes people you love do things that you don't like. And it reminds me that I don't know everything about everyone. I don't know their story. And so for me, what I would want remembered to teach, the lesson I would hope it gives to people as that gift is that reminder that everyone has a story worth telling, and you don't necessarily know it. And when you're reading headlines from newspapers, you don't know the full story. You can even read the full, news brief, but you don't know the full story. And so it's taking that time to get to know the story and to stop jumping to conclusions, because I think a lot of times people think they know the story from reading the headline or from reading this one article that was written by this perspective. And they make a judgment about the person and a whole group of people based on this one article. And so I'd want to, I think, encourage people to stop doing that, to dig deeper, to start questioning, well, what happened before that? What happened next? Or is this really even true? And just, to give people that grace, like you were talking about, to that would be my main thing. It's just, because we have to stop making these assumptions. And I see people doing it all the time. And I'd like that to stop. But Shelly, there's a question in here for you. And this is from Zoom. Can you speak on the epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter?
Yeah. At first, when I was writing, I only had a few quotes because those chapters were directly in conversation with those works. So Everyman is in direct conversation with things like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. And I just thought it was a cool way to expand these conversations because it's in such direct and sometimes indirect conversation with these works and these authors and these particular quotes. So yeah, just a way to expand the conversation beyond the work itself.
Thank you. And there is another question in Zoom. And since I'm unmuted, I'll ask it. So I'm going to start with Edward and then Shelly, if you don't mind answering. Secrets play a big role as a theme in your novels. Did ancestral secrets or folklore play a role while crafting your novel?
I just want to add that I feel lost without the emoji features to like put hearts, and I'm constantly wanting to do that, and it's killing me, and I keep searching for it as if it's like going to magically appear. So if you see me frantically searching.
As someone who doesn't use emojis, can I say I'm thankful that you cannot use them right now? But you know what? If you hop over to the event on Facebook, you can emoji your little heart out to people who are watching there.
Right. I love it. Well, people on Facebook or watching, just know that I am like hearting everything. Everything is resonating. But as far as ancestral secrets, anything like that, not necessarily for my novel. However, secrets play a huge role in it simply because I believe that we, as a defense mechanism, as self-preservation, I know I can speak for myself. I hide lots of things. There are lots of things I'm like, oh, it's going to stay in my head and that's where it's going to reside. And even if I put something on the page in a book, it's not me, it's that character. And so I feel that we work so hard to protect ourselves, and especially just like in our day-to-day, I have to be protective. I can't let everyone in, because actually that's being a little reckless, I feel. If I let everyone into pieces of me, they haven't earned that right. And so I have to be judicious in how I, divvy myself out. And so the characters they have that same experience, but because it's a novel and it's fiction, it's amplified. It's even higher. And so the secrets have higher stakes, and people have higher walls. And so, yeah, the secrets in my book came more so from characters really trying to preserve the parts of themselves, more so because they were just terrified to let them out and terrified to let people in.
Yeah, I agree. As soon as I thought about that, I'm like, wow, this book has really taken its premise as things that we bury and keep hidden. There's a section with a character, Brother Leroy, where Yvonne might get a kick out of this, because I was like, oh, I'm actually going to kind of read it. It would have been an easy task for Brother Leroy to burn his mother's letter. He could have thrown it out on trash collection day and most assuredly never have come in contact with it again. He could have used it as kindling and set it ablaze during one of the community cookouts, shredded it and flushed the fragments down someone else's commode. Heaven forbid a paper floater claimed determined resilience in his own toilet. But people have a habit of hiding things that they wished never existed, right? And then there's a similar excerpt in the chapter Marie Laveau, where it likens how people bury things like Edgar Allan Poe narrators, underneath floorboards and things like that. And so Everyman is concerned with, as I mentioned earlier, what are the stories that aren't being told? Edward mentioned about like really collecting and listening to his family stories. And I grew up the same way, but it's like, what about those stories that aren't being passed down? What about names that, are being kind of erased from the family Bible? What are these lives like? And of course, the first thing you think is, what are the horrible things that this person could have done to be sort of excised from their own family? But the one thing that we also know is, when people are uncomfortable with something, and queerness is one of those things, then stories get manipulated and stories get erased. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the main premise of Everyman. What would be those stories if we could recover them?
Wow. For mine, it was so no to the folklore and ancestral secrets, but secrets in general. I knew that there were going to be secrets around Edward's birth, and some of those secrets were because the characters had never talked about being enslaved with anyone who they loved. And after they had been emancipated and they tried to talk about being enslaved, people felt like people were mining those stories for different reasons. So not because they cared, but because they wanted to hear a certain version of what this might be like. And that version was usually something that they had already considered on the surface. So it was kind of like, entertain me with your story of being enslaved. And so my characters learned early on not to share those stories. So they did not pass those stories down. They didn't tell Edward about a lot of different things. And also it was a form not from them, but from Walker. The girls wanted to know where their mother was. That was the one thing he could give them. So it was the one thing he wouldn't give them. And whatever happened to their mother, it's not revealed in the book. And Walker doesn't say. And so that was power. That was him being able to say whether he knew or doesn't, or doesn't know, he's not telling them. And I felt like, wow, imagine that. There's one person alive who knows the one thing you want to know, and they won't tell you out of spite. Like, how much more can you hurt a person? So for me, that was kind of how secrets were going to work in the book. And so some people keeping secrets for what they thought were good reasons, and other people keeping secrets because they could, and it was power for them. I wonder if we don't have, I see some other questions in the chat, and I'm also wondering if, so Shelly gave us a glimpse of a reading. And so while it's not a competition, Edward, I feel like you have to give us a glimpse of a reading too.
I can do that. I can do that. There's one part I typically read, and it's from chapter 8. I'll read a brief part. I knew very well that the Negro controlled almost nothing in this world. Having that white hand strangled around our necks so tight, with our sights in constant view of what little we had, our toil and our souls and our God, his land, a bounty stretched in front of me, belonging only to the white man. That surge of blood coursed through my brain and caused those few carts on the road before me to burn red hot beneath the sun as it cast mirages over the fields like a sea of watery graves, out amongst the cotton and peat moss, graves that ran for miles in both directions and caused the soil to sway just like that vast ocean it mimed. Those graves placed out there for the just folk, I knew, someplace my Henry most likely laid.
Thank you so much.
I know you're gonna grace us with the reading, right?
Nope. No, I'm kidding. All right, I will do a super quick one. And this is also from my favorite part. And all right. I'm trying to decide to read it really quickly. I'm going to read the last. There's three short paragraphs, so I'm going to read them super quickly so that we don't go. Okay. Watson is just a few strides ahead of Tempe. If she leans forward just a little more, she'll have him. If not, he'll reach the porch, sanctuary, seconds before her. He slows, and even from the back of his head, I know he's grinning. He zags sharply. You're running the wrong way. I can't get the words out fast enough, but then I see he isn't running the wrong way at all. The women must have heard the commotion. Armed with broomsticks, they take to the porch in synchronized annoyance. They stand guard. Around back, the men have already stopped talking about the war, escape, and freedom. They're out front, gruff voices whispering, run. Tempe must have seen it then. We all do. Watson isn't running for the porch. Tempe stops. She stands still, whispering, run, 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 along with everybody else. Watson never stops running. I wish he had taken me with him.
Wow. Wow. That was beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. And thank you both for reading, because you know how much I love that. Absolutely love being read to. It adds another dimension to the story for me. Because when I hear it at first, I hear it in my head. And of course I hear it how, like with my accents or with my whatever, but hearing you all read it, it just brings it to life, and like it makes me want to read it again. So thank you both. Let's see if there is one more question. I think I'll ask a half of one, because it's a two-part question. I'm going to ask a half of that one and then try to ask the last one. This is from Antoine on Facebook. Do you believe that many Black Americans can find a pathway to mental healing and self-love through writing about traumatic experiences of themselves and their family? I'm going to just start with yes, I do believe that there's a power in writing, and you don't have to publish everything you write. So I'm not saying like write this traumatic thing and then publish it, but I am saying that sometimes you can write. I know personally, when I'm going through something, I plot it out like it's a story. And it reminds me that there are other people who have other motivations outside of mine. And I need to do that sometimes when I'm making a life decision. It helps me look at obstacles and helps me think through obstacles in a way that helps me imagine or explore, at least mentally and sometimes emotionally, what the outcome might look like. And once I do that, then really most things become possible. I would say if there are traumatic experiences that someone is grappling with, doing this along with therapy can be a beautiful thing. And so it's making sure that you and people around you are safe while, writing can take you any number of places. And so doing it in a safe way, in a safe space, I think that can be, a really powerful thing. Do you too, like, want to say anything?
Yeah, I agree with that. There's something about holding things in our mind, in our body, that we have to work it out in different ways. And there are several tools that we can avail ourselves to. Writing is and can be one where you can write this outside of yourself. You can write it outside of the body, similarly to how physical exercise works. And I definitely agree with Yvonne that when coupled with therapy, because once you have written it outside of your body and written it outside of your mind, it still is there, right? It reminds me of Stephen King's work, Thinner, where this woman curses this man, and he keeps just losing weight. And he was overweight at first, and then he's getting he's about to disappear with thinness. And so you may be carrying this emotional weight, this trauma, and then you do something to kind of get it outside of yourself. But much like in Thinner, it then lived in this sort of pie, and he was tasked to having to give that pie to someone else. Of course, it's Stephen King, so it's a pretty kind of disturbing way of looking at, trauma. But if you think of sharing that pie with someone else who can bear that burden and help you get rid of that burden, I think that's what therapy, or I know that's what therapy works at, because I do have a therapist, that it's a way of getting that outside of yourself and then finding a safe way to dispose of it as well. But these incidents, this trauma, they never completely leave you, and they can fuel different aspects of your life. And I probably wouldn't be the first one to have used pain and emotion and trauma to fuel my writing. So, that's my answer to that.
And I would just say, I agree with everything that's been said. I know myself better because I write. And I believe that writing can come in many forms. It's just the process of getting it out. And so I have a close friend who sings. And so they will write songs and then sing them. And those songs are the pain that they needed to get out. And they sing them and they release them. And it becomes something sort of beautiful and something that they can look back on as a healing mechanism. And so I would definitely encourage writing in whatever form that may be, whatever expression it may be, because I love writing, but some people dance, some people take walks, whatever that is that you need to get it out. But yes, I encourage writing because I love writing.
Oh, that's lovely. I know that we are just about out of time. I'm going to ask this one super quickly. Peppermint on Facebook would like to know, what makes family? And how do we remember and imagine events of personal history when that history has been stolen, sold, and downright distorted? For me, I'm going to, I guess, start if that's okay. For me, what makes family, it's love. And if I don't know, if I learned this through books and also through life. I've moved to the UK. I didn't know anyone here that I hadn't given birth to. And now, after being here for 8 years, I feel like there are people that I feel like are family, but also some of the family that I hold on to now has been family for 40 years. And that's because they are friends that I know I can trust through anything. And for me, it's that acceptance, it's that trust, that love, that makes it for me. And then for how do we remember and imagine events of personal history when that history has been stolen, sold, and downright distorted? For me, it was research and asking questions. So I would do lots of research, and then I looked at what wasn't there, and I imagined what wasn't there, and I listened to stories and read diaries and read newspapers. And when I wrote, I got to silence characters who spoke too much in other outlets. I got to decide in my novel who got to speak. And so I think for me, that's one way of imagining events, is by controlling that narrative to a point, but because it's not me, it's my characters, but deciding what lens it gets to look out of and who is silenced in my book. And that gives room for other stories. Can I hand it over to you too?
Yeah, same thing. So as not to repeat, but also I think one of the things, particularly with Black families, is we have this history and tradition of fictive kinships that was largely due in part to our enslavement in this country. And so when you get the idea of this is my play cousin, or this, or people who are raised together in communities, that can create family. In queer communities, it's people who show you love and respect when maybe your blood relatives have not. So it's, creating these communities as well. And how we recover these histories, I do believe there's something that always remains in this. And so the first thing that I did was I was able to go and talk to living legends and living community members in Black queer Chicago communities. I also feel like there is just something within our spirit and soul that remains. And you may not know why or how you have this talent or this drive or this desire, but it is motivating and compelling you to find these histories. And so that is one of the things that that you follow. They cannot kill and have not killed our spirit and our soul.
Awesome.
I love
and
that.
I would just say, for me, family, it's taken on so much a broader view, since I don't live around my immediate family. They're all still back home in Tennessee. And so for me, family, it really is about people who lift me to a higher standard. They challenge me, they support me. So I have family in every aspect. I have work family, because it's just a different form of family. But they're holding me to accountability, making sure that I have dignity, equity. They are forcing me to look at myself, and we force each other to look at ourselves. And so anyone who is doing that for me, but also doing that part of supporting me and I help support them, that's family. And so the hardships of having a past try to be stolen and robbed and all of those things is, I live from that strength that it took to get me here. All of the people who came before me, that's my strength. And so I'm able to pull from that. I'm able to pull from stories. And that's how I get this strength to be able to move forward and to be able to write about these things, is because I'm lucky to have those narratives and they be a part of me.
That's wonderful. So there's another question. And I've been told, so if anyone's thinking they're going over, I've been told that we can go to 9. Well, so for my time, it's 9:15. For yours, it's 4:15, I believe. Is that right? But we're not going to keep people much longer. We really appreciate you coming, and we know that there's always something else that you know could be doing. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. I just felt like I really wanted to look at this question too. What are your personal favorite sources of inspiration as authors? Can we start with Edward and then we go Shelly?
So I take lots of inspiration from the past, and so it's so funny. Like my go-to is listening to audiobooks and using that to just like relax, relate, release. And so that's my inspiration, because I don't know how people were able to do it before computers, where they could just delete and do all that type of stuff. Like, how could you write on a typewriter or on a piece of paper? I would be gone. So but I listened to, so just this morning I was listening to James Baldwin, and I I try to immerse myself in writing that really challenges me and that's hard to read. And so people laugh because I'm still trying to make it through Nickel Boys. And I'm just like, I can't, I read and I start crying, and then I like put it down and I'm like mad at the author, and then I like pick it up because I'm like, all right, he's good, he's doing his job, and then I'm mad at him again. If I ever meet him, if I ever get that pleasure to meet Colson Whitehead, I would just want to just tell him, hey, I'm mad at you, but it's cool. And so I think it's reading works that challenge me, that are very difficult to read, but I want to push myself to get through it because I need to work these emotions out within myself.
I am firstly inspired by my family and our family stories and narratives. A big part of this book was my mom's genealogical research into our own family that she's traced back to pre-Civil War, early 1800s. And this is before Ancestry DNA and Google and all of that. And even our just constantly telling the same stories over and over whenever we get together, whether it's at our family reunions, which are a big part for us, or the Friday night, which I'll be having tonight, happy hours with my family that we've been doing since the pandemic started, just telling these stories. And so it's really just kind of opened up for me, what are other stories? Plus my favorite storytellers from Alice Walker and Zora Neale Hurston to more contemporary writers who I just consider my literary siblings and cousins. So Kiese Layman and Robert Jones Jr. and Deisha Philyaw, Donnie Walton. So those works are really, really inspirational. It feels like here is a cadre of writers who grew up like I did in different parts of the country, but going through the same development of reading these same works and it touching our lives in these very different ways, and being able to influence what we all have now out on the shelves. So, yeah.
I think for me, it's because books make me a better person. And reading has done that for me. It's made me, I think, a more empathetic person, slightly more patient, only because I have very little patience as it is, but so slightly more patient, but definitely I think more understanding and more loving. So there are emotions that I don't necessarily feel otherwise, because I don't know, I always feel like I've been emotionally detached in life. And then luckily I came across books that kind of showed me, well, you know what, actually, this is maybe how this might feel, or this might help you connect. And so there's something about words in the page, in the ways that I hear them and kind of imagine them, that become this gift to me and kind of give me this emotional landscape and this way to navigate it. And so for me, having that gift, it's inspired me because I want to give that to other people. I want to be able to create things that help people to feel or to think or to wonder or imagine. And also, I do write for kids as well. And for that, my inspiration is because one day there will be a little person who is in somehow, some way, part of my family, or someone that I'm going to love, or I love already because they're going to, play this important role. And I want them to be born, go to the library, pick up a book and be like, oh my gosh, she loved me. And just like know that this story is made for them. So they're going out there and they are slaying dragons and they are climbing, I don't know, into rocket ships and solving crimes or even causing crimes. But I want them to know that there's nothing they can't do and that I saw that in them. And so I wrote a book that's just for them doing those things. So that for me is like the absolute greatest sort of joy and inspiration for it. But I do feel like this is like back in the day when I used to go to clubs and I used to do it like it was a job. And you know, there was that part where the lights came on and they'd be like, first it was the you don't have to go home, but you have to like get out of here. And then it would be the lights coming on, the music was off. And so I do believe that was our subtle 90-second sort of thing. But so I'm going to skip down to that last question because I really want to answer this. What is your favorite Black owned bookstore or library? And I'm going to say, I would love, love, love to do an event with Uncle Bobby's or with Harriet Bookshop. One, because they're both in Philadelphia, but also they do such amazing things for the community. They it's such a joy to see them operating in communities and doing things like events and staying open during the pandemic and providing. And so that would be, I think, my two. And I would say, Edward, do you want to go next, or
Yeah,
Shelly?
I'm gonna say the Doc Bookshop. So I had the pleasure of meeting the owners, proprietors of this amazing bookshop, doing an event. The love that was sent my way. It's one of those situations where my grandma would always say, you know, someone's praying for you, and that's the best thing you can have is somebody praying for you. And I really felt like somebody was praying for me, and it was them because, like, seriously, I didn't know about them until they reached out to me and sent that love my way. And I have loved them ever since, and always try to send people their direction because that love was shown to me from such an amazing, amazing group of people. So yeah, the Doc Bookshop in Fort Worth, Texas. That's my go-to.
Well, I first and foremost would be remiss if I didn't mention being the child of a librarian. I grew up in Chicago Public Library, so Avalon Branch Library, where my mom was branch head for so many years. So shout out to Avalon Branch Library. Here in Little Rock, Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing has been home for me, just incredibly supportive to everyman. And it's a wonderful space as well, and gallery, and you go and you get to see all this amazing artwork by Black artists, and also just the books that are available and the wonderful staff. Miss Garbo Hearn and her staff are just a joy to work with every time. So yeah. Well, I wanted to show me, Yvonne. When I was talking, he's like, "Where's the list of the books?" I thought if I was talking, you guys would want to. Okay, let me put the books back up. I'm sorry, I was just showing my stupid face.
Oh, that is not at all what I said. All I said was no.
Get your mug off of here. Put the books back up.
So these are a list of Black-owned bookstores, and we encourage you to go out and to buy books and to support authors, to share books, to visit your local library and to read. Can I say thank you so much for this evening? It's meant such a lot to be able to spend this time with you all and to ask even more questions and gain insight into your writing and the stories that you told, the ways that you've just, I think, touched us with, the places that you've taken us, the generosity of your stories and your storytelling on the page, but also off the page with your answering of the questions. I think that's an incredible generosity of spirit and of time. And thank you for giving in and doing the readings. And so my subliminal messages work. No, I'm kidding. But thank you so much. It's been an absolute treat. And I couldn't have imagined another or better way to celebrate Black History Month. than with you incredible authors, and with Blackstone, who brought us together and gave us this space and this platform and this time to just have the chat that we want to chat and have this time together. So a warm thank you. And thank you, of course, to everyone who joined us, for tuning in and spending this time with us from wherever you are in the world, and for buying our books, and for reading our books, and for championing our books and our stories. And of course, for, if you're a writer, for writing those books that we get to read. So I'm going to say a thank you and good night, and I'm going to mute so that you all can say your adieus.
Thank you, everyone. It has been an absolute joy and pleasure. Your questions were amazing. Thank you to our readers and the bookstores that carry us. And I'm sure we all would love to come visit and do events and signings at your bookstores as well. And I would love any time, Blackstone Sibs, Edward, and Yvonne, to do events with you both and readings. Get some funding, and I'll come across the pond to you, Yvonne.
And I just want to thank, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be on a panel with you, M Shelly Conner, and Yvonne. I am a groupie when it comes to authors, and so like this is like really tingly for me. And so I want to thank Blackstone and all of the amazing libraries and bookstores and also readers who choose to go out and purchase the book and support. So yeah, I'm just very grateful.
So we're going to be saying goodnight. Before I do, I will definitely be applying for funding to bring you both across the pond, because that would just be a fabulous treat. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, for your support. Thank you to the bookshops, to the audience, to Blackstones, and of course, to Shelly and Edward. And to everyone, a good night.